Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. It's good to be together this morning. And as Corey said, I'll be continuing in our series. And truth be told, the text that we're going to look at today is one of those texts that you could probably preach a series on. You could do like 4 or 5 different sermons, maybe 6 or 7. So I found myself complaining that I only had one talk until I realized I'm the one that organizes our series, so some self-loathing there. But it's a powerful text, and it's one of those texts that I would really commend to you to spend some time with. All of the Bible is useful and helpful in your life, but this is one of those texts that's sort of a key text to help understand a whole bunch of other texts of the Bible. That's what Jesus says, as we're going to see today, that there's something about the way he teaches here that he's describing something that relates to all kinds of other parts of the Bible and really the condition of people's lives. When I came to know Jesus, many of you would know this, but some of you wouldn't, I encountered God radically in my room one night. I had no life with God. I'd never really even been in church. I just encountered with Jesus. And, when you have a jarring experience where you come into life with God, you want to go tell other people. That's the natural thing to do. Just like if you've ever been to an incredible restaurant, or you've seen an amazing movie, or you found a new band, don't you just go tell people? It demands that. There's an all-you-can-eat sushi place in Arvada now. It's called Sushi Neko. I've been telling people. I'm like I'm an evangelist. But that's what you do and so I remember encountering Jesus and going out immediately and telling friends. And it was one of the strangest experiences, which we've all had at different points, where I would tell people, you're not going to believe this. God is alive. Jesus has done a thing that you never have to feel shame or fear or doubt or worry in your life ever again. You still will, because people's lives are messed up. But God has made a way in this person named Jesus. You can experience his presence. And I can remember looking at people and talking and having them stare back at me blankly. And so I would just talk a little louder. No, it's Jesus, or what? And I just didn't have any tools. I had no techniques. I hadn't learned anything. It was new. And the more I talked, the further they seemed to get, or other people would be seemingly interested, like, oh yeah, I was raised in church. I know what you're talking about. That's cool. And I'd be like, no, but this is worth your whole life. And they're like, yeah, okay. What in the world is happening? I'm telling you something that I didn't know about. But then I had the horrible realization that I had been that person. I had people telling me about a life with God, and I had ignored them. Have you ever had the weird experience? Again, I had this experience a lot, even as I came to Christ, where you go to church with other people. There's other people here with many of you, if not most of you. You go to church with other people. You all hear the same sermon. You're in the same worship deal. You're in all the same deals. And then you go to lunch after. And one of you says to the other one, that was an amazing talk. And the others are like, eh. Or man, that worship experience, man, that one song, and they're like, yeah, I don't know, a lot of words. Whatever, right? The vast difference in how people can experience the same phenomenon. When I started to go to church, I would go to church with the same 3 friends. And I can remember we would go to lunch. And I can remember my one friend every time would be like, guys, wasn't that amazing? And about 25% of the time I was like, that was pretty amazing. But the other times I'd be like, it's fine. I mean, it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't great. It was fine. It was an okay Sunday. I'm glad I went. It was better than not going. Other times I'd think, could have slept in. That one, could have skipped that one. No one here has ever experienced anything I'm describing. But I remember feeling that way, and I remember my one friend was always like, this is just amazing. And it must have been like a year in, I finally looked at him one time and was like, they can't all be amazing. Okay, like, that's just not real. Like, are you lying? Are you just enthusiastic? You know enthusiastic people, aren't they annoying? They're just always into it. You're like, really? Come on, it's not that great. And I remember doing that, and I remember it was like he'd been waiting to say this. It's like he'd been waiting a year for me to give him the opportunity to say it. At least that's how it felt. And he said, oh, Jay, it's not about the seed, it's about the soil. It's not the seed, it's the soil. Are you prepared to receive something good from God? It's not the seed, it's the soil. So I show up in these environments wanting to grow, wanting to learn. I prepare my heart because I think God has something for me every time I stand in front of him. Every time I open the Bible, every time I gather, I'm under the assumption God has something good for me. And I'll never forget him just saying it that directly and me going, oh no. I think he's right. I don't think he's just being mean, though he may have also been mean. I think he was saying something that was true. And it was one, you have different moments in your life that arrest you. They stay with you. That's one that has stayed with me. That it's not about the seed, it's about the soil. The text we just heard describes a story where Jesus says to his huge crowd, there's this farmer out there just throwing seed out, throwing seed. And that seed is falling on different soil, and some of the soil takes the seed, some of the soil doesn't. But even some of the soil that takes the seed, it doesn't really take root. It looks like it's growing, but it's not really growing. And it's really only 25%, a quarter of the soil takes the seed to where it grows up and produces a crop. And Jesus told parables for a number of different reasons. We talked about this 2 weeks ago. We actually looked at the end of this passage, so I'd commend 2 weeks ago to you to look at, because I'm tempted to re-preach that sermon, but I'm not going to. The four soils is what I really want to focus on, because after he describes that there's these four different soils, one where it doesn't grow up at all, another one where it grows up a little bit, another one where it grows up a little bit, but then it dies, and then the other one where it actually produces only 25%. He ends telling that story with this line. This is in verse 9. Then Jesus said, whoever has ears to hear, let him hear. Verse 10, when he was alone, the 12 and the others around him asked about the parables. He told them, the secret of the kingdom of God has been given to you, but to those on the outside, everything is said in parables, so that, this is quoting from Isaiah, they may be ever seeing but never perceiving, ever hearing but never understanding. Otherwise, they would turn and might be forgiven. Again, we talked about this 2 weeks ago, where it's confusing. It's as though Jesus is saying, I'm telling stories so that people won't understand what I'm saying. And what he's really saying, if you weren't here 2 weeks ago, is I'm watching to see who leans in versus who pulls away. When something's confusing, when it doesn't make sense instantly, do people lean in? Because if they lean in, that shows the condition of their heart is as a learner. But if they lean back, they're really just out for themselves. He goes on to describe it more effectively. Verse 13, then Jesus said to them, don't you understand this parable? How then can you understand any parable? Now that's the key turn. He's telling us something in this parable that'll make it so we understand every parable. He's saying, if you don't understand this parable, none of the other parables will make sense to you. Because I'm telling you something in this parable that explains why I do why I teach the way that I teach, why I do what I do. And so he goes on. He says, the farmer sows the word. Some people are like seed along the path where the word is sown. As soon as they hear it, Satan comes and takes away the word that was sown in them. Others, like seed sown on rocky places, hear the word and at once receive it with joy. But since they have no root, they only last a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, they quickly fall away. Still others, like seed sown among thorns, hear the word, but the worries of this life, the deceitfulness of wealth, the desires for other things come in and choke the word, making it unfruitful. Others, like seed sown on good soil, hear the word, accept it, and produce a crop, some 30, some 60, some 100 times what was sown. 4 different soils. The path, the rocky soil, thorny soil, and the good soil. Now, it's worth pausing here to just note something, because it's important to pay attention to this. Whenever you read the Bible, but definitely when reading this passage, and thus all passages like this, it's easy. We all do a thing when we read the Bible, which is we make ourselves the heroes without knowing it. Right? Any passage, like Jesus is engaging the Pharisees, you're like, those Pharisees are the worst. I would be awesome. They are the worst. I would just like to suggest to you that if you read the Bible that way, you're missing almost all of the Bible. Because the scriptures regularly say, no, you're probably the worst. You probably would be with the crowd shouting, crucify him. You would probably be the one doubting. You would be the one arguing. You know how I know that is because I've been with the humans. And I myself am one. I've stared in the mirror. If you really want to get the most out of any text, you don't want to make yourself the hero. You want to ask, what is going on with the worst version here? What's going on with the worst character here? And where do I see that in my own life? And what would God want to say to me about that? See, this text, it's easy to say, I must be the good soil. And you start immediately thinking about all the other really dumb people who just, I know people like that. I know people like that. And thus in doing so, you fulfill the parable. You demonstrate that you are not the humble one that leans in, that you're not the tender-hearted one that seeks to receive the seed. You're the person that feels as though you can justify and make sense of it even before you've even let the force of the text hit you. You've decided, well, that's probably not me. Anybody do this? We all do this. Let me do it the other way around. Have you ever had a moment where something of the life of God hits your heart? It could be about money. It could be about forgiveness. It could be about prayer. It could be about your marriage or friendships, parenting. Something hits your heart where you're like, oh my goodness, this is life to me. And it often comes with conviction, like, what have I been doing? How in the world have I been living the way I have? How have I allowed lust to just run through my life? How have I allowed so much anger to rule in my soul? How have I been so fearful? Or why have I doubted so much? Anybody ever had a moment where you have like a turning point in your life and you realize, what have I been doing? Anybody? If you haven't, maybe today could be your day. I mean, those should be regular occurrences in the pursuit of a life with God. And you have that moment, and then you have the next moment that comes right after it, which is you're like, wait a minute. That means every other time I've read this passage, every other time I've heard a sermon on this, every other time I've heard somebody refer to this in the scriptures, it didn't take root. That means every other time somebody told me, your money is not yours, you're supposed to be generous with your money. I went, oh, that's an interesting thought. What's for lunch? Listen, there's some of you, listen, this is very important you hear me right now. There's some of you in this room, you're not even sure why you're here. You have heard about Jesus Christ, maybe for years. Maybe today's the very first time. But something about it doesn't get through. Or you can remember a moment when you were like, oh, I'm going to give everything to Jesus, but then something snuck in and your heart grew cold. You found a way to rationalize it. Some of you here are choosing to live in unforgiveness, in bitterness towards someone in your family or a friend or an ex-girlfriend, an ex-boyfriend, a boss. You're choosing to live that way. And you've heard people say, forgiveness is the key. If you don't learn to forgive, you're going to be stuck in bitterness. And you're like, okay, yeah. I noticed that one bed in my yard needs some weeding. I should probably do that when I get home. There's a double meaning there. Anyway, but like you get distracted. You do something else. This is why this is such an important thing to think about for a second. Seriously. Because what Jesus is giving us in this text is a way of thinking about ourselves, a way of thinking about what it means to come into life with God and what it means to continue to grow in a life with God. That those of you who've been in church a long time, be very careful when you find yourself saying to yourself, I already know what this means. Oh yeah, I know this text. Yeah, I got it. The minute that becomes sort of your tendency, Jesus is saying something to us, which is, but is it taking root? Is it producing fruit? Are you the kind of soil that regularly receives the seed? Because there's two things that are interesting that before we even look at the soils. The first is that the sower is a bad sower. Any of you that are gardeners, you don't just like go into your yard and go, grow plants, grow. Just throw, grow. Right? That's like a really bad way to make a garden. Just like running through outside. You plant, my wife's got this great garden. It's like in rows. Everything's labeled. Make sure it gets watered appropriately. If I just looked at her and she had like tomato seeds, she's like, tomatoes, tomatoes, tomatoes. They'd be like, da-da-da-da-da. It's like the wrong way to do it. And this is a bad gardener. He's a bad farmer in that he just throws the seed. But in this, here's what we learn. God is generous. He's generous. He throws the seed anywhere and everywhere. He gives everybody a shot. Everybody gets a chance. They all get a chance to hear about who God is and how he loves them and how he came in the person of Jesus. Everybody gets a shot. He's generous. He's constantly sowing. And in this way, the people of God are meant to be this way. We're to constantly tell people, but there is a way with God. God loves you. Jesus has done a thing. Even if people are like, meh, you're supposed to be like God. You're supposed to be generous. You just sow generously. You don't just talk to the one friend the one time. You're just constantly giving it away. And so God is generous. And the seed is good. There's no question about the seed in the text. The question is about the soil. I've been in environments where someone communicates the gospel in the very worst possible way. Like I've been in sermons where somebody's like, Jesus, he's okay, but you need help. He loves you. You should follow Jesus. I'm like, what the heck is that? Those words didn't even make sense together. And somebody's like, I'm in. I'm like, really? That's not how that's supposed to work. That was terrible. And then I've been in other rooms where somebody gives this super eloquent, well thought out, really constructed thing. I remember listening to one preacher do a court case, like proof of the resurrection. The first witness would be this, and the second witness would be that, and the third witness is that. And here's history that shows us this, and the compulsion of your heart demonstrates blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, listening to this, and I brought my friends, and I'm like, there is no chance they're not giving their life to Jesus today. And then it ends, and he's like, who wants to respond to Christ? You can come up. And I look at my friends like, this is it. This is it. This is a moment. And they're like, are we going to go right to lunch from here? Because I'm trying to. What? Did you hear it? This is when you give your life to Jesus. No thanks. It's not the seed. It's the soil. It's not the seed. It's the soil. The life of Jesus is so compelling. 4 soils. There's the path. This soil is the hard heart, the seed that's snatched away. There's no receptivity. And this kind of soil only changes by being broken up. There's people that's just like, they're not interested. And you know when people tend to become interested who have never been interested? When something horrible happens. Just this week, I had a friend who I've shared my faith with, probably 200 times. And each time he's like, that's good for you, whatever. And he's got a really good life. His life works, which is like the most annoying part. Because he's like, my life works. I'm happy. I've got money, I've got friends, everything works for me. And each time I'm like, but have you considered Jesus? He's like, no. Have you considered making more money, Jay? Because it's great. And we do this, and it's painful. Well, anyway, he had 2 people die near him in the last 3 weeks. And all of a sudden he calls and goes, I'm realizing it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how much money you have. It doesn't matter how much success you have. It doesn't matter. Can you remind me again? What's that thing you've been telling me? Because I've seen your life. I've seen you've gone through mess, and you still have a way of living. I am falling apart. The path often just needs to be broken up. But even if it's broken up, the rocky soil is the next soil, and that's the shallow heart, says Jesus. And the shallow heart is the heart that enjoys a life with Jesus right until it's hard. Right until it means that they're going to be challenged in their faith. Right until it means they have to submit every part of their life to God. Right until they have to stand against the cultural moment. Nearly everyone who's followed Jesus throughout the history of the world hits a moment where the ways of Jesus are at cross purposes with the cultural moment. And you and I live in a very small section of church history, which is to have faith in Jesus doesn't mean you go to jail. It doesn't mean someone's going to try to kill you. For most Christians, for most of church history, to follow Jesus means you will very likely be put in jail and possibly murdered. By the way, that's true all over the world right now, all kinds of places all over the world. You and I live in a weird moment. This is not the normal moment. This is the weird moment. And Jesus' basic argument is there's people that love Jesus right until it costs something. Right until it costs your reputation. Right until you say that I stand for the poor. I stand for refugees. Immigration matters because the Bible says it matters. Some of you right now were like, I didn't know Jay was a Democrat. No, I'm talking about the Bible. That's what the Bible teaches. Some of you are like, but he's still a Democrat. Okay, listen, this is my point. This is my point, is we've allowed the cultural moment to inform us more than the scriptures themselves and the history of the tradition we have in Jesus Christ. We are anti-racist not because we're left-leaning, but because the Bible is. Does this make sense? Some of you are like, Okay, rocky soil. So, rocky soil. I wish I was joking. Third soil is the thorny soil. I'll do it very quickly. He says those are who believe, but it's actually the deceitfulness of riches is what he says, money. The idea to possess things becomes more important than actually trusting in Jesus. You know that you have the deceitfulness of riches if you believe that money is the goal of life. That if I have enough money, I'll probably feel better. If I just had another $50,000, if I just had another $100,000, my life would feel so much better. If right now I said that to you, do you think $100,000 would change your life? I think if I could hook you up to a lie detector test, a lot of you would be like, yes, everything would be better forever. And don't just think this is like an old person's game. I know people like to make fun of boomers. It is running through the millennial younger world right now, where it's like, if I could just be independent, financial independence, the 4% rule. If I had 25% of my income in passive income generated through 4 different businesses, that gain interest at 18%, blah, blah, blah. If I had 25 times my income at 4%, I draw down over 25 years, I could be financially independent. I could live in Bora Bora with... I'm just describing like every TikTok influencer. That's a young person's game, not just an old person's game. And I'll tell you what it means. It means it'll crowd out the life of God. If you believe that finances provide security, you are living a lie. And it means that the soil will not receive the seed. It won't receive the seed. It will not receive the life of Jesus. The writer of Hebrews says it very directly, and this is how I'll finish. He says, let your character be free from the love of money, being content with what you have, for he himself said, I will never desert you, nor will I ever forsake you, so that we can confidently say, the Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What shall man do to me? Do not put your hope in wealth. Can you see how these different soils aren't somebody out there? They're in us. They're in our cultural moment. That we love Jesus until it's painful. We love Jesus until it might cost us our reputation. We love Jesus until, it means I have to give money up. I mean, one of the ways you know if you're really trusting in Jesus is how generous you are. You will not become generous when you get more money. It's just not how it works. You are as generous as you're going to be right now. You have to choose to be generous now. And then you grow in a lifestyle of generosity. That's how you know you don't put hope in wealth. Are you a generous person? And the Bible seems to think that 10%, the first 10%, is the low bar for generosity. That's the low bar. That's not the high bar. That's the low bar. And that's not just a thing you check, like, yeah, I did that. It's like, no, you want to grow in generosity. Are you the kind of person that's growing in generosity? Are you the kind of person that's trying to figure out how to make more money so you can give more money? Because if that's the kind of person you are, it will change the way you live. But you know how I know if you will be that person is if you are that person. And if you're not that person, hear what I'm saying, it means that the soil might not be receptive to the kingdom. Okay, so everyone find themselves in one of these other soils possibly? At least you're aware of the one that you might be. There's something you can do about that. There's ways that you can ask God to turn the soil of your heart.